The second Danny starts believing Jason was never really taken by the WSB, everything changes. And honestly, guys, that's the part I can't stop thinking about. Because if you look closely, Danny isn't acting like a scared kid anymore. He's acting like somebody who believes the adults are lying to him. That's dangerous, especially in Port Charles, where half the truth usually gets people killed. And if you ask me, Danny convincing himself that Sidwell staged the entire WSB capture story actually makes perfect sense. From his perspective, Jason disappears, nobody gives clear answers, and suddenly everyone just expects him to accept it. No body, no proof, no real explanation. I'm sorry, but Danny grew up around too much chaos to blindly trust official stories. That's exactly why I think this Windermere break-in is happening. Not because Danny wants adventure, not because Charlotte wants rebellion, but because Danny is desperate to find something connected to Jason, anything, a clue, evidence, proof that his father is alive somewhere inside Sidwell's nightmare operation. And the worst part? I genuinely think Danny believes he can handle it. That's what makes this storyline so tense for me. Danny isn't reckless in the usual teenage soap opera way. This feels more emotional than that. He's operating from fear and loyalty at the same time. Those combinations create the dumbest decisions imaginable. We've seen it 1,000 times in this show. Now add Charlotte into the equation, and suddenly this becomes a disaster waiting to happen. Because Charlotte has always had that dangerous streak where she thinks she's smarter than the room. Sometimes she is. Sometimes she absolutely isn't. But when Danny comes to her asking for help, sneaking into Windermere, there's no way she says no. Honestly, I think part of Charlotte probably enjoys the thrill of it. The secrecy, the risk, the feeling that they're doing something the adults are too afraid to do. And then there's Rocco. Guys, this trio is chaos. Actual chaos. People forget these three already have a history of getting themselves into insane situations. The lab incident proved that perfectly. Rocco got caught before because Dalton was alive back then and managed to stop him. Danny and Charlotte barely escaped. Barely. That wasn't some harmless teenage prank. That was the show warning us what happens when these kids think they're invincible. And here's why this matters now. Dalton is gone. Sidwell is not Dalton. Sidwell is colder, smarter, more paranoid, which means Windermere probably isn't some spooky mansion with a few locked doors anymore. I think Sidwell has transformed that place into a surveillance fortress. Cameras everywhere. Motion sensors. Guards. Hidden monitoring systems. The kind of setup where Danny and Charlotte probably get spotted almost immediately without realizing it. That's the creepy part to me. I don't think the danger begins when Sidwell catches them. I think the danger begins the moment Sidwell notices them and says nothing, because that feels like Sidwell's style. Let them wander. Let them panic. Let them think they're unseen while he watches every move from a screen somewhere. Honestly, that psychological angle is far scarier than some simple capture scene. And this is where I think the story takes a brutal turn. Because Danny and Charlotte are going into Windermere searching for Jason, but they're not going to find Jason. They're going to find Josslyn. That changes everything instantly. Can you imagine that moment? Danny opening some hidden door, expecting answers about Jason, only to discover Josslyn imprisoned somewhere underground? Weak, terrified, desperate. That's the kind of reveal that completely shifts the emotional energy of the storyline. And personally, I think Charlotte is the first one who realizes how bad the situation truly is. Danny's mind is focused on Jason. Charlotte's mind is survival. The second she sees Josslyn locked up, she probably understands something Danny still refuses to accept. Sidwell is far more dangerous than they imagined, because once they discover Josslyn, the mission is over. Now it becomes escape. And I honestly don't know if they're smart enough in that moment to call for help immediately. That's the frustrating thing about teenagers in soap storylines. They always think they still have time. Time to investigate more. Time to unlock another door. Time to search one more room for evidence. But in places like Windermere, hesitation gets punished fast. I could absolutely see Danny insisting they keep searching for proof connected to Jason even after finding Josslyn. That would be such a Jason-like trait, too, ironically. Refusing to walk away without answers. Refusing to leave unfinished business behind. But Charlotte, I think she panics first. And honestly, she should, because the second Sidwell realizes they found Josslyn, those kids become liabilities, not intruders. Liabilities, there's a huge difference. An intruder gets thrown out. A liability disappears. That's why I think this entire operation collapses almost immediately after the Josslyn discovery. Danny and Charlotte probably get cornered before they even understand how trapped they are. Windermere has always been written like a gothic prison anyway, but now it feels less like a mansion and more like a predator's cage. And this is where Rocco suddenly becomes the most important person in the entire storyline. I really need people to remember this detail carefully. Rocco may not even enter the main operation fully. He could stay outside acting as lookout, watching entrances, monitoring, timing, making sure nobody comes. At first, that sounds like the least important role. But it's actually the role that saves lives. Because if Danny and Charlotte disappear inside Windermere and never come back out, Rocco immediately knows something went wrong. That's huge. That changes the entire outcome. If all three got caught together, they'd be doomed. But one person escaping, that creates hope. And honestly, I love the idea of Rocco becoming the unexpected hero here. Not through fighting, not through some ridiculous action sequence, but through intelligence, through fear, through doing the one thing teenagers almost never do in these situations, calling adults for help. That would actually show growth, real growth. Instead of trying to rescue Danny and Charlotte himself, Rocco could finally understand this situation is beyond them. So he calls the police, maybe Dante, maybe Anna, maybe everyone. And imagine how insane that rescue operation would become once authorities storm Windermere expecting to find two missing teenagers only to uncover Josslyn imprisoned there too. That's the twist nobody sees coming inside the story itself. Rocco thinks he's saving Charlotte and Danny, but he accidentally exposes Sidwell's entire operation. And if this plays out the way I think it could, that rescue becomes the beginning of Sidwell's downfall. Not because some master detective solved the mystery, not because the WSB cracked the case, but because three reckless teenagers stumbled into the truth by refusing to stop looking for Jason. Honestly, there's something painfully believable about that. Adults in Port Charles spend so much time hiding secrets and manipulating narratives that the younger generation eventually starts taking matters into their own hands. That's what this story really feels like, underneath all the suspense. Distrust. Danny doesn't trust the official story about Jason. Charlotte doesn't trust adults to protect them. Rocco doesn't trust that his friends are safe. And that emotional distrust is exactly what pushes this entire nightmare into motion. But here's the final thing that really sticks with me. Even if Josslyn gets rescued, even if Danny and Charlotte survive, they still may not find a single thing that helps Jason. That's tragic. All this danger, all this trauma, all this fear, and Jason could still remain trapped somewhere else entirely because the WSB is the real force hiding the evidence. Which means Danny risks everything for answers that may not even exist inside Windermere. And honestly, that's what makes this story feel darker than people realize.